I've dealt with rude neighbors before, but nothing prepared me for the day. A full-power Karen stormed across my newly purchased land and screamed at me for camping. Yeah, camping. On land I literally owned. My buddies and I had spent months planning a peaceful week away from work, fishing in the creek, cooking over the fire, and sleeping under the stars. We drove in laughing, dragging coolers and gear, soaking in every second of that fresh country air. And for the first hour, it felt perfect. Quiet, wide-open hills, giant oak trees, nothing but nature around us. Then her voice shattered the morning like a siren dropped from the sky. "Hey, what do you think you're doing on my property?" A woman in her 40s, sunglasses, hands on hips, marching toward us like she owned the entire county. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just picked a fight she couldn't win because we weren't trespassing. We were home. Before we jump in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your area, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild HOA stories. We'd spent half a year searching for the perfect place, somewhere quiet enough to escape our jobs, big enough to stretch our legs, and untouched enough to make a grown man feel like a kid again. When we found this piece of land listed online, 40 acres of rolling pasture with a creek splitting it down the middle, we knew it was the one. 3 of us pooled our money, made an offer the very next day, and within 2 weeks the deal was done. Just like that, we were landowners. And let me tell you, nothing makes you feel more alive than pulling up to a place that's officially yours. The moment our truck turned off the gravel road and onto the grassy path leading into the property, the whole group fell silent, not because we were bored, but because of how unreal the view was. The hills were soft and green, sloping like waves all the way to the horizon. The creek shimmered in the sunlight. Deer trotted off in the distance, as if politely making room for us. One giant oak stood at the center like a king's throne, its branches wide and inviting. "Boys," my buddy Jeff said, leaning forward in the passenger seat, "we're gonna die out here, but like, happily." We all cracked up. The atmosphere was perfect, fresh air, quiet, the smell of grass and creek water. Even the breeze felt like it had been waiting to welcome us home. We parked under the big oak and got right to work. Setting up a campsite is like a ritual. Unfold the chairs, unload the cooler, raise the tent, stake it down, then immediately crack open a cold beer to celebrate. We had barely finished the first round when the sun dipped behind a cloud and everything around us went quiet. For a second, I thought maybe a storm was blowing in. Then I heard it, a noise so sharp it sliced right through the peaceful countryside. What do you think you're doing?" All 4 of us froze. Jeff slowly turned his head toward the sound and whispered, "Uh-oh, boss fight." Marching toward us across the field was a woman, mid-40s, bright sunglasses, stiff posture, stomping like the ground had insulted her personally. She moved with that signature Karen energy, furious, entitled, and powered entirely by vibes of misplaced authority. She didn't even say hello. "This is private property," she barked. "You can't just show up and camp wherever you want." I stood up, hands raised in the universal sign for "calm down, lady. You are several levels above reasonable right now." "Ma'am," I started politely, "we actually own this land. We bought it last week. I have the paperwork in the truck. I don't want to see your fake paperwork," she snapped, stepping closer. "I know the man who owns this land. My family has been hiking here for 20 years. He would never sell it to strangers." Behind me, my friends exchanged looks, half confusion, half "we told you she was a Karen." I tried again. "We're not strangers to him. We bought the land legally. His name's on the deed, and now ours is too." She crossed her arms so tightly her elbows nearly touched. "No, absolutely not. You people are trespassing. And if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the sheriff." Her voice was sharp enough to scare birds from the trees. She didn't look confused. She looked offended, as if the simple idea of us being here was a personal attack on her entire family lineage. Jeff muttered behind me, "Bro, she's acting like we stole the Declaration of Independence." I kept my voice calm. "Look, I don't want any trouble, but we really are the owners. You can call whoever you want, but we're not going anywhere." Karen let out a loud, dramatic gasp and pointed in my face. "You'll regret this." Then she spun around and stormed back toward a house on the far edge of the property line, muttering loudly enough that we could hear, "Idiots, criminals, I won't let them ruin my trails." As soon as she was out of earshot, the whole group burst out laughing. "Bro, we've been here 30 minutes, my friend Sam said, shaking his head. Did we accidentally buy a portal to the HOA underworld? But even as we joked, I felt that little warning buzz in my gut, the one that says this woman is going to make your life way harder than it needs to be. Still, we refused to let her ruin our first day. We dropped our fishing lines into the creek, kicked back in our chairs, and soaked in that sweet countryside silence. Well, as much as we could before Jeff launched into his 10th conspiracy theory about Karen patrolling the woods at night, with night vision goggles. By dusk, the sky was glowing orange, the campfire was crackling, and our cooler was noticeably lighter. We roasted sausages, told stories from work, and even dared each other to jump into the freezing creek, which lasted about 5 seconds before we scrambled out yelling like children. For a little while, the world was perfect again. But as soon as the sun dipped low behind the hills, we saw movement at the fence line. A silhouette, hands on hips, staring, Karen, just watching us, not talking, not yelling, just standing there like a forest cryptid, fueled entirely by resentment and HOA rulebooks. "Dude," Sam whispered, "why is she built like a scarecrow possessed by spite?" Jeff waved dramatically at her like she was an old friend across the street. Karen spun around and stomped back toward her house. That night, I lay in my tent thinking about her, a stranger who in less than an hour had made it her personal mission to erase us from land we legally owned. I couldn't understand it. Was it entitlement, territorial instinct? Or was she simply one of those people who thought any land they stepped on automatically belonged to them? Whatever the reason, I knew one thing: Karen wasn't done. The next morning, that theory proved itself correct. We were jolted awake by the sound of knuckles pounding hard against the door of the camper. I rubbed my eyes, swung the door open, and there stood a sheriff's deputy. He looked tired. Not angry, not surprised, just tired, as if he'd been dealing with Karen long before we ever stepped foot on this property. "Morning, folks," he said, tipping his hat. "We got a trespassing complaint from a neighbor." Behind him across the field, Karen stood triumphantly, with her arms crossed, wearing a grin so smug it could have been a crime by itself. For half a second I considered laughing. Instead, I handed the deputy the deed, the purchase contract, and the official county paperwork. He scanned them, nodded slowly, then turned to give Karen a look that said, "For the love of God, please stop doing this." "Ma'am," he called out, "they own the land." Karen froze. "It must be forged," she shouted back. They tricked him, they tricked the seller, but the deputy wasn't having it. "Ma'am, I'm warning you. Do not make false reports. This is perfectly legal." Karen stood there, jaw-clenched fists, tight face red, as the deputy apologized to us, wished us a good day, and drove off. The moment his car disappeared down the road, Karen let out a sound halfway between a growl and a scream. Then, she stormed away again. Jeff shook his head. "Yeah, she's absolutely not done." He was right. This was only the beginning. I honestly thought the sheriff shutting her down would cool things off. Most people, after getting publicly proven wrong, would retreat for at least a day, maybe 2. But Karen, no. Karen was built from some rare strain of stubbornness that modern science hasn't figured out how to classify yet. If anything, the sheriff's warning only ignited something inside her, like someone had injected entitlement straight into her bloodstream. We'd barely finished cleaning up breakfast when we heard the familiar crunch of footsteps across dry grass. Jeff didn't even look up from his coffee. "Incoming. Brace yourselves." Sure enough, there she was, marching straight toward us, with the intensity of a woman who had spent all night rehearsing new reasons why we shouldn't exist. This time she brought reinforcements. 2 more women followed behind her, each carrying the same expression: eyebrows, raised lips, pursed faces, shaped like perpetual judgment. If Karen was the queen, these were her loyal handmaidens of chaos. They halted a few feet from our fire pit. Karen inhaled like she was about to project her voice to the heavens. "You," she barked. "Sheriff or not, this is not over. My family has used this land for generations. Generations. You can't just waltz in, pitch a tent, and pretend you belong here. I mean, Jeff said that's exactly what buying land means." The 2 mini Karens gasped dramatically, clutching their chests like he'd slapped them with a legal document of disrespect. Karen ignored him and pointed at me. "I spoke to the community this morning, and they all agree that you're destroying the natural hiking trails we worked hard to preserve." "Ma'am," I said calmly, "the trail is literally just grass." "There's no actual trail." "That's because you idiots camped on it," Sam chimed in deadpan. "So the trail was invisible." Her face twitched. "Don't be smart with me." She took a step closer, lowering her voice like she was delivering the villain monologue of a bad TV drama. "You boys packed up today. You hear me, pack up today, or I will make things very, very difficult for you." I crossed my arms. "Karen, I don't know how else to say this. We own the land. We're not leaving." Her lips curled into a bitter smile. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel, her squad trailing behind her like angry ducklings, and marched back toward her property. Jeff immediately started clapping slowly. "Oh my God," he said, "we are absolutely living rent-free in this woman's head." We all laughed, but I felt the weight of what was coming. Karen was escalating, and people like her didn't stop until they ran out of breath or enemies. By noon, the first strike landed. A truck rolled up the gravel road. The driver stepped out, wearing a uniform that instantly confused all of us. Animal control. He walked toward us with a clipboard. Afternoon. We got a report of illegal trapping activity on this property. All four of us stared at him. Jeff whispered, "You've got to be kidding." "We haven't set any traps," I said. "You're welcome to look around." He inspected the campsite, checked the creek, wandered through the tall grass. Nothing. By the time he made his way back, he already looked exhausted, like he'd been dragged into this kind of drama before. "Y'all are fine," he said, shaking his head. "Sorry to bother you." "Let me guess," Jeff said. "Was the caller named Karen?" The animal control officer paused, then sighed in defeat. "Ma'am in question has called us about 17 times in the past 2 years. For creative reasons." We tried not to laugh in front of him. "I'll file this as unfounded," he said, "and if she calls again, we'll handle it." He left. 20 minutes later, before his truck even disappeared from view, another one appeared. "Game warden. Got a report about illegal hunting activity." I raised both hands. "Sir, we're literally making s'mores." He looked around. No guns, no snares, no signs of anything. He gave a slow nod, climbed back into his truck, and left without incident. Not even an hour later, another vehicle pulled up. Sheriff's deputy again. He didn't even wait for me to explain this time. He just walked over, hands on his hips, and said, "She called again, didn't she?" I nodded. "Look," he said, rubbing his eyes, "I'm gonna have a talk with her. A serious one. You boys enjoy your camping trip." He left shaking his head like a man who wanted to retire early. At this point, it had become a comedy. A parade of uniformed officials being summoned like Pokemon, each walking away more annoyed than the last. Jeff started keeping a tally on the cooler lid with a Sharpie. Animal control, 1 game warden, 1 sheriff, 2 Karen meltdowns, infinity. By the time dinner rolled around, the sky had turned a mix of pink and gold. The creek reflected the light, the air smelled like pine and grilled meat, and for a moment, just one moment, it felt peaceful again. Then I heard rustling from the tree line. Slow, heavy, purposeful. Jeff looked up from his plate. "Tell me that's not her again," but it wasn't. It was Karen and her support group. 6 middle-aged women, arms crossed, marching toward us like a PTA meeting gone rogue. Karen lifted a megaphone. I swear it was a megaphone. "You are trespassing," she yelled, voice booming across the hills. "This is a community space." Before any of us could answer, one of the mini-Karens shouted, "Leave the hiking trails alone. You're destroying nature." Another chimed in, "There are delicate ecosystems here." Jeff pointed to a patch of grass. "Ma'am, that's a dandelion." "Exactly," she screamed. It went on like that for a solid 10 minutes, just wave after wave of nonsense accusations and deeply questionable biology. Finally, Sam walked over to Bluetooth speaker and turned on some classic rock. Loud. Loud enough that Karen's whole speech dissolved into a muffled, indignant screech. Her group gasped. "You're being rude," Karen shouted. "We're camping," I said. "You're trespassing on our land now." Karen sputtered like her brain was buffering. The group huddled up, whispered furiously, then marched away as dramatically as they'd arrived. That night, we stayed up late, playing cards around the fire. Every now and then, we'd see a distant figure pacing angrily on the edge of her property. Jeff raised his beer. To Karen, he toasted. "The only woman who can turn a peaceful vacation into a government-sponsored field trip." We laughed, but I could feel something shifting. She wasn't just annoyed, she was obsessed. And obsession never ends well. Still, we weren't backing down. Not an inch. As I sat by the fire that night, watching the embers rise into the dark, I realized something. This wasn't just a camping trip anymore. This was a battle. And we were only at the beginning. By the 4th day, the novelty of Karen's tantrums had worn off. At first, it was funny, like watching a live-action sitcom unfold with an over-caffeinated villain. But now, it was draining. Every morning started with her stomping toward our campsite. Every afternoon featured one government vehicle or another rolling down the path. And every evening ended with her pacing her property line like a guard dog with a personal vendetta. Still, we refused to let her ruin our trip. We woke up early, brewed strong coffee, and hiked along the creek. We fished until our arms were tired. We grilled steaks, played cards, and napped in hammocks under the shade of the giant oak. Despite the constant background noise of Karen's nonsense, the land felt more and more like the sanctuary we'd hoped for. But Karen, being Karen, was incapable of letting anyone enjoy anything she didn't personally approve of. It all started again on the morning of day 5. I was sitting on a fold-out chair enjoying a quiet moment with my coffee when I noticed a familiar silhouette, Karen, marching towards us with a kind of purposeful rage, like she'd trained for this exact confrontation by yelling at customer service representatives for sport. And this time, she held something in her hand. A stack of papers. "Oh boy," Jeff murmured. She brought props. Karen stopped right in front of me, puffing out her chest like a rooster preparing for battle. "I have spoken," she announced to the entire community board. I blinked. "The what?" She thrust the papers closer. "The community board. And we have decided unanimously that you must vacate this land within 24 hours. I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Karen, there is no community board. This isn't an HOA. Her eyes narrowed like she was trying to laser beam me into compliance. "We have a Facebook group, okay? And we made a decision." Jeff coughed loudly to disguise his laughter. Sam wasn't even trying. He burst out laughing so hard he dropped his toast. Karen spun toward him. "This isn't funny. You are illegally interfering with generational hiking lands." I leaned forward. "Karen, we bought this land. The man who owned it sold it to us. Legally, with a deed, with signatures, with a recorded transfer at the county office." She waved her hand dismissively. "That means nothing to me." Jeff slapped his forehead. "Of course it doesn't." Karen then launched into what I can only describe as an Olympic-level rant. She claimed we were destroying ecosystems, contaminating her ancestral walking paths, lowering the value of the entire region, causing moral decay, encouraging reckless behavior, attracting outsiders, and my personal favorite, introducing dangerous urban energy into the countryside. I still don't know what that means. None of us do. When she finally ran out of breath, she jabbed her finger into the air like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. "You have 24 hours, she declared dramatically, "or we will take further action." Then she spun around, nearly tripping over a tree root, and stormed away with the same fury she had arrived with. As soon as she was gone, Jeff crossed his arms. "She's running out of law enforcement agencies to call. Pretty soon she's going to summon the Coast Guard." I laughed, but deep down I sensed it again, that tightening, that warning. Karen wasn't just annoying, she was the kind of person who escalates until something breaks. But we weren't afraid of her. In fact, we were starting to get inspired. Later that afternoon, while we were grilling burgers, Sam said something that changed everything. "Guys," he said, flipping a patty, "hear me out. What if we don't just camp here?" Jeff looked up. "Meaning, what if we build something, a cabin, a getaway spot, a place we can come back to? Hell, we can turn this into a ranch." I stared into the fire, imagining it 2 log cabins overlooking the creek. A wooden deck, fire pits, a horseshoe pit, a trail leading down to the water. A place to call ours, permanent, protected. A retreat from everything Karen represented. Jeff's eyebrows shot up. "Dude, that would be sick." Sam nodded. "We own 40 acres. Why not make something out of it?" I leaned back in my chair, letting the idea settle. The more I thought about it, the more it felt right. We'd bought this land for peace and freedom. Why leave it empty for most of the year? Before long, the conversation turned into planning where the cabins would go, how big they'd be, what materials we'd use. It was exciting. It felt like a new chapter. And that's exactly when Karen reappeared. She must have been spying from her window, because she showed up just as Jeff said the words "front porch." Karen froze mid-step. "Front porch?" she asked, her voice trembling. I met her eyes. "Yeah. We're thinking of building a couple cabins out here." Her jaw dropped open so far I thought it might unhinge. "You can't," she shrieked. "This is a sacred land, a natural reserve, a hiking sanctuary. It's private property," I reminded her. "Our property." "No," she yelled. "No, no, no. This land cannot be developed." "Absolutely not. I forbid it," Jeff snorted. "You forbid it, Karen. This isn't a medieval kingdom." But she wasn't listening. She was spiraling. She kept pacing, waving her arms, muttering things about petitions and committees and environmental violations. At one point, she tried to quote a non-existent county regulation about emotional heritage rights. Finally, she stopped, looked right at me, and hissed, "I swear I will not let you build a single thing on this land." Then she stormed away again, more furious than ever. Sam flipped another burger. "Well," he said cheerfully, "now we have to build something." And that's how it began. The next morning, we drove into town and bought initial supplies, stakes, flags, measuring equipment. Nothing big, just enough to start planning. When we came back, Karen was waiting. She stood on her property line with her arms crossed, hair messy, wearing pajama pants and a robe, as if she'd sprinted outside the moment she saw us pulling up. "What are those?" she shouted. "Landmarkers," I replied. "No," she screamed. "Absolutely not." She stomped toward us like an upset toddler, grabbed one of the markers and tried to yank it out of the ground. It snapped in her hand. She froze. Jeff whispered, "She's gonna explode." And explode she did. For the next 10 minutes, she unleashed a full meltdown, screaming, cursing, throwing accusations our way, calling us criminals, invaders, city rats, infecting the countryside. Yes, she said that. But we didn't shout back. We didn't argue. We didn't even acknowledge her rant. We just kept working, measuring, marking, sketching. And something about that, our calm, our refusal to react, broke her brain. Her voice cracked. "You can't," she gasped. "You can't just ignore me. On my land." "This isn't your land," I said gently. "You know that." She shook her head wildly. "It is. It always has been. It always will be." Then, with a final breathless growl, she stormed away again, disappearing behind the trees. Sam set down his measuring tape. "She's escalating, like actually escalating." Jeff nodded slowly. "Yep, and she's not going to stop." I looked around at the land, the creek, the trees, the wide open space, and felt something settle inside me. "We're building," I said, "and we're not backing down." The others nodded. Karen had declared war. We had just declared ownership. By day 6, Karen's behavior had evolved from an annoyance to a full-blown daily ritual. Every morning, like clockwork, she emerged from her house wearing whatever combination of robes, slippers, or mismatched pajama pieces she'd slept in, stormed toward us with righteous fury, and demanded we abandon the land we had legally bought. By noon, she usually escalated to calling at least one government agency. By evening, she resorted to pacing her property line like a furious lifeguard guarding a pool she didn't own. And yet, despite the chaos, our campfire nights remained the heart of the trip. The quiet crackle of the flames, the laughter of old friends, the sound of the creek rushing gently nearby, it reminded us why we bought this place in the first place. But even the peaceful countryside couldn't drown out Karen's determination. If anything, it fueled it. On the morning of day 6, I was frying bacon on the camp stove when I heard muffled voices approaching. Not yelling, not stomping, whispering, that was new. Jeff peeked over the top of the camper window. "Oh boy," he said. "She brought the whole coven this time." Sure enough, Karen was leading a group of 7 people, men and women, all late 50s to early 60s, marching toward our campsite like an HOA parade on a mission. They held clipboards, printed papers, even binoculars. One guy wore a reflective safety vest like he'd just been sworn in as assistant to the regional Karen. Karen stepped forward dramatically. "Good morning," she said in the same tone someone might use to announce an audit. "We're here to conduct an inspection." I stared at her. Of what she flourished a stack of papers. "This entire property." Jeff blinked. "You want to inspect land you don't own." We, Karen corrected, gesturing to the group behind her like they were the Avengers of Entitlement or the Community Preservation Committee. Sam leaned close to me and whispered, "Pretty sure she invented that 15 minutes ago." Karen cleared her throat loudly. "We're here to ensure you are not harming protected ecosystems." A man with binoculars added, "We saw you chopping branches yesterday." "That was deadfall," I said. "It was already on the ground." Another woman gasped. "So, you're admitting to manipulating forest materials without a permit?" Jeff burst out laughing so loudly that a bird flew out of a nearby tree. "A permit? For picking up sticks?" Karen scowled. "This isn't a joke. You could be damaging valuable natural resources." I crossed my arms. "Karen, this land belongs to us. We're allowed to clean it, camp on it, improve it, and build on it. You can't inspect anything here." She smirked triumphantly as if she were about to drop the world's greatest plot twist. "Oh, but we can." She held up her phone. "We've filed a petition with the county." Sam raised an eyebrow. "A petition for what?" "To declare this land a protected community recreational area," she said proudly. "And until they respond, we are fully authorized to supervise and intervene." I stared at her, stunned. That's not how anything works. But Karen wasn't listening. She marched forward and began poking around our fire pit, shaking her head disapprovingly. "This fire ring is too large," she announced, "and too close to the oak tree." "It came like that," Jeff said. "Nature built it." "Ask her." One of the men paced around, taking photos like a low-budget wildlife documentarian. Another sniffed the air dramatically. "I smell smoke," he said. "That's because we have a campfire," Sam deadpanned. Karen whipped around. You can't just burn things wherever you want. There are rules, there are fire regulations, yes, I said, all of which we're following. There's no fire ban. This is a cleared ring. We're using safe materials. Karen waved her hand. I don't care. It looks dangerous. Then she stomped toward the creek. And what is this? She demanded. I walked up beside her. A creek. She rolled her eyes like I was an idiot. I know it's a creek. I mean, what's this setup? That's fishing gear. You're fishing, her voice cracked like the concept had offended her soul. You're disrupting the creek's natural flow. Jeff couldn't help himself. We caught a trout, Karen, not redirected a river. One of her clipboard carriers began scribbling dramatically. Another took photos of the water zooming in on literally nothing. Karen turned to me with righteous fury burning in her eyes. We're reporting this. Go for it, I said. She let out a loud HMPH and signaled her group to retreat in formation, like a retreating brigade of angry geese. As they marched back toward her house, Jeff let out a long whistle. She's leveling up, he said. This is the boss fight before the boss fight. But as annoying as her committee was, what happened next was almost impressive. That afternoon, while we lounged by the creek, a white SUV pulled onto the path. It looked official. Government plates. The door opened, and a man stepped out, wearing khaki pants, a crisp uniform shirt, and a badge. Afternoon, he said politely. I'm with the County Environmental Health Division. Sam winced. Karen, he nodded. Yup. Reports said there was illegal dumping water contamination and possible hazardous waste. I nearly choked. Dumping. What would we have dumped? She said she saw you pouring chemicals into the creek. Jeff held up his can of beer. It's Coors Light, not acid. The officer sighed. Do you know who the reporting party is? Yes, we all said in unison. He rubbed his forehead. I figured. He walked the property for 20 minutes, inspected everything, tested nothing, and ultimately found, of course, absolutely no violations at all. You guys are fine, he concluded. But, for your own sanity, you may want to document everything. She seems persistent. Persistent was an understatement. When he left, another vehicle arrived an hour later. This time it was code enforcement. I'm looking into a report of unauthorized construction, the officer said. Jeff grinned. We haven't built anything yet. Report said you were erecting structures without permits. I pointed to our tent. Does that count? The officer shook his head and left. By dinner, Jeff had updated the tally. Environmental health. 1 code enforcement. 1 day rewind. 0 Karen meltdowns. All despite everything we kept trying to salvage the evening. We grilled burgers, popped open a few beers, and stretched out in our chairs while the sun dipped behind the hills. The light was warm, golden, peaceful. Then we heard a rustle behind us, branches snapping. Heavy footsteps. At first I thought it might be deer. Then I heard a voice, a whisper. There they are. I told you. I turned around. Karen was standing behind a cluster of bushes, binoculars around her neck, flanked by 2 men with cameras. They froze like deer caught in headlights. I blinked. Karen, are you spying on us? She stepped out confidently like she hadn't been hiding in foliage 2 seconds earlier. I am conducting community surveillance, she declared. We are documenting all offenses. Jeff stood slowly. Offenses. Karen pointed dramatically at our grill. Open flame outside, designated recreational hours. Sam blinked. Designated by who? She lifted her chin proudly. By ME. We all stared at her. I finally said, You don't run anything here. You don't make rules for land you don't own. Her face reddened so fast it looked like she might burst. You're ruining everything, she screamed. This land is supposed to be peaceful, beautiful, sacred. You're destroying it. Jeff spread his arms. We're literally eating burgers. Karen trembled with rage. Then she pointed at me like she was casting a spell. You mark my words. You won't be able to stay here. I will stop you. Then she spun around and stormed off, dragging her assistants with her. When she was gone, the whole group sat in stunned silence for a few seconds. Finally, Sam exhaled. Guys, I think she's actually losing it. Jeff nodded slowly. We should just go ahead and build the cabins. If this is how she's acting now, imagine when she finds out we're staying permanently. I stared into the campfire, the flames flickering across the wood. Karen thought she could scare us away. She thought she could bully us off our own land. But all she'd done was convince us of one simple truth: we weren't leaving. Not today, not next week, not ever. And if she wanted a war, she was about to get one. Day 7 started calmer than the rest, and that alone made every one of us suspicious. The sun was still low, the air was still cool, the creek was still whispering through the rocks, and Karen was nowhere in sight. It was the kind of silence that feels wrong, like the world is holding its breath before something stupid happens. Jeff stepped out of the camper stretching. Feels like a trap, he said. Sam poured coffee into a tin mug. I give it an hour. I took a seat by the fire pit. No way she's done. She's probably building a catapult or something. Jeff pointed dramatically. A Karen pult. Launches complaints instead of boulders. We laughed it off. But deep down, I knew today would be different. We had officially decided to turn this place into a real ranch. Not just a camping spot. Not just a weekend hangout. A project. A retreat. A legacy. And Karen, despite her delusions, was about to learn the truth. We weren't temporary guests. We were permanent. Around mid-morning, we heard the rumble of tires crunching on gravel. Not one vehicle. 3. Sam glanced at me and raised an eyebrow. Expecting company. The first truck was ours, loaded with lumber tools and supplies we had ordered from the local hardware store. The delivery guy hopped out and began unloading planks and posts like it was just another Tuesday. The second vehicle was another crew truck, 2 contractors we'd hired to help with foundations later in the week. They pulled up, stepped out, and stretched like men ready to work. The third vehicle, well, the third one was Karen. The doors flew open and slammed shut before the engine even stopped. Karen barreled toward us like a storm cloud, wearing yoga pants in fury. Her hair was unbrushed, her face flushed, her slippers half falling off as she sprinted uphill toward the lumber. "No," she shrieked, voice cracking. "No, no, 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 no." The delivery guy froze. One contractor paused with a toolbox in his hands. The other looked around like he'd just accidentally stepped onto a movie set. Karen shoved her way through our crew and planted herself directly in front of me, shaking with rage. "What is this?" she demanded, pointing at the lumber like it was radioactive. I shrugged casually. "Wood." She stomped her foot. "I know it's wood. Why is it here? We're building cabins," Jeff said cheerfully. 2 of them. Maybe 3 if the fishing is good. Karen's entire being convulsed at the idea. "You can't build anything here," Sam leaned forward. "Why not?" Because she sputtered, "Because it ruins the aesthetic of the valley." I spread my arms. "It's our aesthetic now." Her face turned crimson. "This land is special. It has history. It is part of our traditions. That tradition," Jeff said, "is called trespassing." Karen let out a sound between a gasp and a scream, then spun and addressed the delivery crew. "You can't unload that here. This is not permitted land." The delivery guy, clearly used to dealing with difficult customers, pulled out the order slip. "Ma'am, this is the address on the order. Paid in full. This is the right place." "No," Karen snarled. "It's my place." I stepped beside him. "Actually, it's ours. Fully deeded. Recorded with the county." Karen snapped. "You tricked the old owner," I sighed. "We bought it legally." Her eyes flicked to the contractors next, and she pointed at them dramatically. "And you too. If you so much as lift a hammer, I will sue you for damages." One of the contractors, a tall guy named Daniel, scratched his beard. "Ma'am, we're working on private property," he said, "not yours." Karen's voice rose to a piercing shriek. "This is a natural park." The other contractor, Emilio, frowned. "It's literally private land. Says so right on the order sheet." But Karen wasn't listening. She was spiraling. "You can't cut trees. You can't move dirt. You can't lay foundations. You are destroying my land." Jeff raised a finger. "One more time for the people in the back, not your land." Karen shook her head violently. "This place belongs to me, to us, to the community." I finally stepped forward, my patience thinning. "Karen, this land belongs to us. The county recognizes us. The sheriff recognizes us. The state recognizes us. The previous owner sold it legally. With signatures. Recorded, stamped, filed, official." She stared at me, panting. "I won't let you ruin it," she whispered. "I won't." Then she pointed to the lumber like she'd discovered a murder scene. "This is illegal construction." "It's not," I said. "It will be when I call the county. Go ahead." Karen froze. She wasn't expecting that. She spun around so quickly, her slippers nearly flew off, stomped back to her SUV, and peeled away so fast she kicked up a cloud of dust behind her. Daniel whistled. "Is she always like that?" Jeff shrugged. "This is her calm day." Despite the drama, we began unloading. Planks stacked neatly, tools aligned, stakes hammered into the soil to outline the first cabin's footprint. The day felt productive, exciting even, until Karen came back, with reinforcements. Around 3 p.m., a caravan of cars rolled up the gravel road. 5 vehicles, people spilling out like they were attending a town hall meeting in the middle of a field. Karen led them like a general marching into battle. "We're shutting this down," she yelled. The group behind her nodded in grim agreement, as if they truly believed they had jurisdiction over land they had never owned. A man stepped forward. Bald 50-something wearing cargo shorts and sunglasses. "I'm Greg," he announced, like we should know him. "I'm the president of the Community Preservation Network," Jeff whispered, translation Karen's Facebook group. Greg puffed his chest. "We are filing an injunction to halt construction." I raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds?" "On grounds of environmental protection." Sam pointed to our materials. "It's pine lumber. We're not digging an oil pipeline." Greg ignored him. "We're giving you one chance, pack up and leave. Permanently." I crossed my arms. "No." Karen let out a triumphant smirk, "Then suffer the consequences." What came next was truly something to behold. Greg and Karen attempted to circle our construction markers like they were staging a protest. They planted folding chairs in the dirt. They held up hand-painted signs that read things like, "Save our hiking trails," and "No cabins on sacred land," and my favorite, "Stop the builders." The contractors stared in disbelief. Finally, Daniel sighed. "Ma'am, sir, we have a job to do." Greg pointed at him. "You will cease immediately." Daniel looked at me. "Are we good?" "We're good," I said. "Keep going." And they did. The contractors lifted the first beam. Karen screamed like someone had lit her hair on fire. "That's illegal construction," she wailed. "Stop, stop." Right now Greg joined in. "We've called the county," Great Jeff said. "They'll tell you the same thing the sheriff told you. And animal control. And code enforcement. And maybe even NASA, if you tried calling them too." The group eventually realized their shouting wasn't stopping the build. So one by one they left furious, defeated, muttering threats under their breath. Karen stayed the longest and left the angriest. But despite everything, that day marked our first real victory. The stakes were set. The plans were approved. The materials were delivered. The builders were hired. The cabins were officially underway. As we watched the sun set behind the hills, lighting the sky orange and pink, I felt a deep satisfaction. This land was ours. This ranch would be ours. Karen's protests, threats, meltdowns, they were just noise now. We weren't backing down. We weren't leaving. We weren't intimidated. Karen had declared war, but she forgot one crucial detail: we already owned the battlefield. The next morning felt different, not because anything had calmed down, but because something inside me had settled. Resolve, maybe. That quiet, grounded feeling that comes when you know the situation is going to get worse before it gets better, but you're ready for it anyway. The cabin frames were scheduled to go up that day. The contractors were returning with more tools, and we planned to spend the whole day working alongside them. It was exciting seeing those lines in the dirt turn into something real, something permanent, something Karen couldn't erase with a phone call or a tantrum. We were eating breakfast burritos by the fire when Sam pointed toward the road. "Here comes the morning entertainment," he said. Sure enough, Karen's SUV came barreling down the path like she was fleeing a crime scene. She skidded to a stop, flung the door open, and marched toward us with an expression halfway between fury and triumph. She held something high above her head, a stack of papers, messy, crumpled, and suspiciously printed on neon pink paper. "Oh boy," Jeff said, sipping his coffee. "The sacred scrolls of the Karen kingdom." Karen stomped up to us, slammed the papers against my chest, and declared, "You are hereby ordered to stop construction." Immediately, I glanced down at the papers. They were flyers. Badly typed, horribly formatted flyers. At the top, in bold Comic Sans, were the words, "Community Cease and Desist Order." Below that was a paragraph that made so little legal sense even a toddler would have questioned it. Something about collective ownership rights and historic usage priority, and the authority of the community council to revoke building privileges. I looked at Karen. "This isn't real." She jutted her chin forward. "It will be," Sam snorted. "Karen, this looks like something a bored middle schooler prints during detention." Her face twitched. "It's official community documentation printed on pink paper," Jeff added. "Pink is the color of urgency," she shrieked. I rubbed my temples. "Karen, you can't make up government documents in Microsoft Word." "It's not Microsoft Word," she snapped. "It's Google Docs." Jeff whispered, "Oh well, that makes it legally binding." Karen stomped her foot. "Mock me all you want, but I have filed a formal obstruction complaint with the county." She pointed dramatically toward the horizon. "And they are sending someone today." I raised a brow. "For what reason, environmental interference?" she said triumphantly. Sam leaned toward me. Translation: she complained that we breathed too close to a pine cone. Karen spun around and marched back to her SUV, yelling over her shoulder, "Enjoy your last few hours of construction." She peeled away, spitting gravel behind her. I exchanged a look with the others. Well, this should be fun. By noon, the contractors had arrived and were already measuring sawing and prepping supports. The sound of hammers and saws echoed across the hills. It felt like progress, loud, undeniable, unstoppable progress. Then another vehicle rumbled down the path. "A county truck," called it, Jeff said. The man who stepped out wasn't what I expected. He was older, maybe late 50s, with weathered hands, a sun-beaten face, and a gentle politeness that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Afternoon," he said. "You boys, the new landowners." "Yes, sir," I replied. He nodded. "Name's Dale, County Water and Land Use." Sam whispered, "Karen's been summoning every Pokemon she can." I handed Dale the deed and purchase documents before he even asked. He looked them over carefully, nodding in satisfaction. "All good here," he said. "County records match up." "So what's the issue?" I asked. He sighed a deep, world-weary sigh. "We received multiple complaints," he said. "Claims that you were altering waterways, rerouting creeks, disrupting protected vegetation, all sorts of nonsense." Sam raised his hand. "We caught a fish. Does that count?" Dale cracked a small smile. "No. But apparently Karen thinks everything counts." Jeff leaned in conspiratorially. "She also thinks invisible trails are real." Dale looked around, scanning the land, the construction markers, the creek, the tools. After about 5 minutes, he gave a satisfied nod. "Everything looks in order," he said. "You boys are well within your rights." "Thanks," I replied. "We figured as much." "Just wanted to see it with my own eyes," he said kindly. "I'll go ahead and mark the complaints as unfounded." We walked him back toward his truck, and at the last moment Dale paused. "She's been calling us for years, you know," he said quietly, "complaining about everything from trespassers to leaf patterns." "Leaf patterns?" Jeff slapped his forehead. "Oh God," Dale shrugged. "I'll have a word with her." Again. He climbed into his truck. "Good luck, boys, and enjoy the place. It's beautiful." When he left, peace settled again briefly. Only briefly. By mid-afternoon, the first cabin posts were standing. The foundation outline was complete. The contractors were in their rhythm tools, buzzing sawdust, floating through the air like golden confetti. Then we heard screaming. Not close, not nearby, but off in the distance, echoing across the hills like someone had stepped on a wild animal. "Oh boy," Jeff said. She saw the posts. A minute later, Karen appeared on the horizon, like a furious storm cloud running full speed across the grass. Not walking, not marching, full sprint, arms flailing, screeching like she'd just seen us burn down the entire forest. "You can't," she howled. "Stop." She stumbled twice but kept going. Even the contractors paused to watch, mouths slightly open. Karen reached us panting, sweating, and absolutely unhinged. "You can't do this," she wheezed. "Yes," I said calmly, "we can. This is illegal." "It's not." She pointed at the posts. "Those are violations." Jeff grinned. "Technically, they're just pieces of wood sticking out of the ground." Karen screamed a raw primal scream that startled the birds out of the trees. Then she pulled out her phone. "That's it," she yelled. "I'm calling the state." Sam tilted his head. Which state, emotionally or geographically? Karen fumbled with her phone in a frenzy, dialing someone with trembling hands. We listened as she unleashed a tornado of lies into the receiver. "Yes, hello, I need emergency intervention. They're building unauthorized structures. They're damaging ecosystems. They're threatening wildlife." There, she paused. Her face twisted. "No, not on my land, on theirs," she snapped. Even her imaginary authority hotline didn't respect her. She ended the call with a frustrated scream and shoved the phone into her pocket. "I won't let you win," she howled. "You don't belong here." I stepped closer, leveling my voice. "We do belong here," I said. "We bought this land. We care about this land. We're building something beautiful here." She shook her head violently. "You're ruining everything," I gestured around. "Karen, look." The creek flowed softly. The oak tree cast long shadows. The hills rolled in golden waves. The land was peaceful. Untouched. Serene. Except for one thing. You're the only one ruining anything. She froze. Her jaw trembled. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger, fear, and something else. Something desperate. "This was mine," she whispered. I felt a tiny pang of something, sympathy maybe, but it didn't last long. "Then you should have bought it," I said softly. She inhaled sharply like I'd slapped her. Then she turned around and ran, truly ran back toward her house. Daniel, the taller contractor, exhaled. Wow, he said. You weren't kidding, Emilio added. This lady needs a hobby. We are her hobby, Jeff said. But despite everything, the yelling, the sabotage attempts, the false reports, the cabin frame continued rising. Wood met steel, beams locked in place. By evening, the cabin outline cast long shadows over the field. It was real. It was happening, and Karen could do nothing about it. We capped the day with a fire, tired but proud. The first cabin was no longer an idea, it was a physical structure, stubbornly surviving despite Karen's best efforts. And as the stars appeared one by one, Sam leaned back in his chair. You know what he said? I think Karen finally realized the truth today. Jeff nodded. Yeah. She can't stop us, I added. And she knows we're not going anywhere. But little did we know, Karen wasn't done. Not even close. By the next morning, the cabin frame stood tall enough to cast a long, proud shadow across the field. It was still bare bones, beams, joists, and the beginnings of a roofline, but it was unmistakably real. A structure, a presence, something permanent, something undeniable, and for Karen, something unforgivable. I don't think she slept that night. I don't think she even sat down. I imagine her pacing in front of her window, clutching binoculars like a general watching enemy troops build a fort on the horizon. Because the moment the sunlight hit those wooden beams, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of a shriek echoing across the valley. Jeff sipped his coffee without even looking up. Right on schedule. Sam nodded. A little early today. She must be excited. I stepped outside the camper, stretching, soaking in the cool morning air. It would have been peaceful, beautiful, even if not for the sight of Karen speed walking toward us at a pace that suggested she might spontaneously combust. She wasn't alone. Behind her were three people dressed in cheap polo shirts with matching lanyards. Their polos said Valley United Neighborhood Watch. Underneath in much smaller letters was the phrase community powered since 2021. Sam whispered. That's when she started the Facebook group, isn't it? Oh yeah, Jeff said. This is her army. Karen stomped up to the cabin posts and jabbed a finger at them like she'd caught them committing a felony. You are done, she shouted. Over. Finished. This, she slapped one of the beams with her palm, ends today. The beam didn't move. Karen did. She hopped back, holding her hand like she'd just smacked a brick wall instead of a plank. One of the polo shirt people hurried up with concern. Karen, are you okay? I'm fine, she snapped, then pointed at us. They are not. The woman in the polo adjusted her lanyard and cleared her throat in what she must have thought was an authoritative tone. Ahem. We've received several community reports of unauthorized development. I nodded. From Karen. She faltered. Well, yes. And you understand, I continued evenly, that this is private land and you have no authority here. Well, she said, we're here to provide oversight. No, I said. You're not. Karen turned bright red. They're interfering with protected spaces, Sam raised an eyebrow. Protected by who? You? Karen jabbed a finger at her chest. Yes, me. I have the right. No, you don't, I said calmly. You had 20 years to buy this land. You didn't. We did. That was the moment her expression changed. The fury was still there, but something else bubbled up behind it. Bitterness, loss, fear, a crack in the armor. But it only lasted a second before the rage returned tenfold. I will get this stopped, she screamed. I will go to the county, the state, the news. I will go all the way to the governor if I have to. Jeff nodded thoughtfully. The governor would love to hear about your invisible hiking trails. Karen spun around and screamed at the sky. I genuinely think she hoped the universe itself would intervene, but the universe remained silent. The cabin, on the other hand, stayed standing. Karen's neighborhood watch troopers eventually realized they had no legal ground and awkwardly shuffled back to their cars. Karen lingered longer, staring at the cabin frame with the intensity of someone willing it to collapse through sheer hatred. But it didn't. It only grew taller throughout the day. By noon, the roof joists were in place. By afternoon, the flooring was nearly complete. Each new beam hammered into place felt like another nail sealing Karen's defeat. When the contractors took a lunch break, I walked over to check the progress. The structure was rough, but the view from the soon-to-be front porch was breathtaking. The creek sparkled in the sunlight below. The hills rolled lazily behind it. Birds perched on branches as if welcoming us. This is going to be amazing, Sam said quietly beside me. It already is, I replied. But Karen wasn't done. Apparently she had reached her limit for amateur tactics. Flyers, protests, community watch groups, none of it worked. So she escalated in a way none of us expected. Around 3 p.m., another unfamiliar vehicle rolled down the path. Not a county truck, not animal control, not code enforcement, not even the sheriff's deputy this time. A black SUV, tinted windows, clean, expensive looking. It stopped near the cabin, and the driver stepped out, a tall man in a suit and tie carrying a briefcase. Jeff muttered, "Oh, God." She hired a lawyer. The man approached us with a stiff, rehearsed expression. "Afternoon," he said. "Are you the property owners?" "Yes," I replied. He nodded. "My name is Richard Hall. I represent a concerned local resident who has requested an injunction against your construction." I raised an eyebrow. "And that resident would be—" He cleared his throat. "I cannot disclose that." Jeff smirked. "It's Karen." The man adjusted his tie but didn't deny it. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of legal documents, and handed them to me. They were typed, formatted correctly, and stamped until I looked closer. "Richard," I said slowly, "these aren't court documents." "They are legal notices," he insisted. "No," I said, "they're drafts." He stiffened. "I am preparing to file the injunction. My client has brought evidence that this construction is harmful to the community." I scanned the evidence. It was a folder filled with blurry photos of our campfire. A picture of Jeff holding a marshmallow, a zoomed-in shot of Sam stepping on a stick, a screenshot of a Google search about endangered moss species, a hand-drawn map labeled Karen's Trail with arrows pointing everywhere I looked up. "You can't be serious." The lawyer cleared his throat again. "My client feels strongly about this." Jeff folded his arms. "My guy, she makes fake cease and desist flyers in Comic Sans." The lawyer's eye twitched. "This construction must stop," he said firmly. "No," I replied. He blinked. "Excuse me, no," I repeated. "We're building. Legally, with permits, with a deed, with rights." Richard exhaled slowly, clearly frustrated. "Then my client will pursue further legal action." He snapped his briefcase shut and marched back toward his SUV. Jeff waved at him. "Tell Karen we say hi." The SUV pulled away at full speed. One of the contractors, hammer in hand, walked over. "She really brought a lawyer. Not a good one," Sam said. "Probably hired off Craigslist." We all laughed, tension easing for the moment. But Karen didn't stay gone for long. About an hour before sunset, she returned, not marching, not screaming, not even running. She walked slowly, quietly, almost defeated. Her eyes were puffy like she'd been crying. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "You're really doing this," she said softly. We froze. Karen had never spoken without yelling before. It was unsettling. I nodded. "Yeah, we are." She looked at the cabin, then at the creek, then at the hills. "This was my place," she whispered. "My family's place, for so long." Her voice cracked. "We would come here every weekend. My kids learned to walk in that creek. My husband built a swing on that oak. She stopped swallowing hard. "We spent our best days here." For the first time since we'd met her, she didn't look angry. She looked heartbroken. And suddenly the puzzle pieces clicked. Karen wasn't just entitled. She wasn't just annoying. She was grieving. Not a death, a loss of something she'd convinced herself was hers. "We didn't know," I said quietly. "No one told us." She wiped her eyes. "Of course they didn't. Why would they care about what matters to me?" For a moment none of us spoke. The creek flowed softly. The sun dipped behind the hills. Karen stood there, smaller than she'd ever seemed. But then, her eyes hardened, her jaw clenched. Whatever vulnerable moment had flickered inside her snapped shut. "You're still ruining everything," she whispered. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Jeff let out a long breath. "That was weird." Sam nodded. "Yeah, I almost felt bad for her." "I did too. Almost. But sympathy didn't change the truth. She didn't own the land. We did. And we weren't tearing down the cabin. Not for Karen, not for anyone. And as night settled over the valley, we believed naively that Karen had finally accepted reality. But we were wrong. Because the next morning, Karen came back with a plan so unhinged, so unbelievably bold it made every meltdown before it looked like amateur hour. And none of us were ready for it. Karen didn't show up at dawn like she usually did. There was no early morning shriek, no binocular glare from her window, no angry stomping in slippers. Instead, the valley was quiet, too quiet. The air felt heavy, as if the land itself knew something was brewing just out of sight. Jeff brewed a pot of coffee and narrowed his eyes at the tree line. "I don't trust this," he muttered. "She's either asleep dead, or plotting something biblical. Sam stepped out of the camper stretching. She's definitely plotting. Probably building a trebuchet in her garage. I chuckled, but the truth was I felt it too. That creeping sensation that the world was holding its breath before something wild happened. And at around 9 a.m., that something wild rolled in. It started with the rumble of engines. Not one, not two, plenty, more than any of us expected. The first vehicle to appear around the bend was a large silver SUV, then another, then a pickup, then a sedan, then two more SUVs. All of them pulling into the grassy path as if they were arriving for an open-air wedding, except instead of flowers and music, they brought scowls, folded arms, and tension thick enough to cut with a chainsaw. Sam leaned forward. "Oh no," Jeff groaned. "The HOA army has arrived. Except we weren't in an HOA. We weren't in a neighborhood. Hell, we weren't even in city limits. We owned 40 acres of private land with no official oversight whatsoever. But that didn't stop Karen. She stepped out of the lead SUV wearing sunglasses, a windbreaker, jeans, and the deepest sense of self-importance I had ever seen in my life. She looked like she was leading a rescue mission to save the planet. Behind her were at least a dozen people, some neighbors we'd never met, some older locals who looked confused, and a handful of what could only be described as Karen disciples, clipboards, notebooks, a few cameras. One guy was even wearing a hard hat for absolutely no reason. Karen spread her arms wide like a prophet delivering a warning. "Everyone," she bellowed. "This is the criminal operation I've been telling you about," Jeff whispered. "Criminal operation. We're building a cabin, not cooking meth." Two of the clipboard women gasped as if Jeff had admitted guilt. Karen pointed aggressively at the cabin frame. "Look at this monstrosity," she cried. "They are destroying the natural land. They are ruining decades of heritage." An older man stepped forward. Karen, didn't the old owner sell this place?" Karen spun. "The old owner was tricked, manipulated, coerced." I raised a hand. "We offered the asking price." Silence. Karen ignored me and continued her performance. "These men," she said, pointing at us like we were fugitives on a wanted poster, "are building illegal structures." One of the men in the crowd frowned. "Karen, the county guy, was here yesterday. He said everything was fine." "That man was incompetent," she countered. "He's been working for the county 30 years, another woman said. Karen stiffened. Well, he was wrong." Jeff stepped forward with a grin. "Karen, why don't you tell everyone about the cease and desist flyers you printed in Comic Sans?" Karen turned beet red. "That was a preliminary measure," she snapped. One of the neighborhood watch ladies whispered Comic Sans. Karen shushed her violently. The crowd murmured. Some skeptically, some obediently, some reluctantly realizing Karen might be several crackers short of a picnic, but Karen wasn't finished. She marched toward us until she was so close I could smell her peppermint gum and fury. "You have two choices," she said, jabbing her finger at my chest. "Stop construction and remove everything, or the community will take matters into its own hands." Jeff's smile disappeared. "Is that a threat?" Karen smirked. "It's a promise." Before I could respond, she spun toward the crowd and yelled, "Show them." And that's when things escalated from irritating to downright insane. A group of her followers marched forward carrying signs. Hand-painted, crooked, misspelled signs. They read, "Save nature now, stop land destroyers, no trespassing, yes on land, we owned, protect Karen's trail." And my personal favorite, "Cabins equals corruption," Sam whispered. "Wow. Putri." Karen lifted her megaphone, and yes, she really brought a megaphone. "This land is protected by tradition," she cried. "We stand against this violence." At that exact moment, Daniel and Emilio, the contractors, stepped out of their truck with fresh lumber over their shoulders. Karen spun around. "No," she hissed. "Put that down." Daniel blinked. "Why? Because I said so? That's not how construction works, ma'am. This is illegal, all of it." Emilio scratched his head. "We have the permits right here." Karen froze mid-scream. "You!" What Daniel pulled a neatly laminated packet from his pocket. "Lumber delivery, permit work authorization, environmental compliance form. Your county office approved everything. We picked it all up this morning." Karen's face fell as if someone had unplugged her power source. But no, this isn't how." Daniel shrugged. "We're good to go." He and Emilio walked around Karen like she was a traffic cone and resumed carrying lumber toward the cabin frame. And Karen snapped, truly snapped. She let out a shriek so loud that birds fled the trees and the entire crowd froze. Then she stomped into the middle of the cabin footprint, spread her arms wide, and declared, If you want to build, here you'll have to build over my dead body, Emilio sighed. Lady, please don't. Karen collapsed to her knees on purpose dramatically like she was auditioning for a low-budget theater play. I won't move, she wailed. I won't let this happen, the crowd gasped. A few of her followers knelt beside her. Others backed away awkwardly. Sam muttered, Bro, she's doing a full-body protest. Jeff nodded. Next step is gluing herself to a tree. Karen screamed up at the sky, I am the protector of this valley. At that moment, her SUV drove up. Except, she wasn't driving it. A sheriff's deputy was. The deputy stepped out calmly, hat low, expression unimpressed. Karen froze. Officer, thank God you're here. The deputy held up a hand. Ma'am. Stop. Karen scrambled to her feet, brushing dirt off her jeans. Arrest them. They're building illegally. They're destroying the environment. They're ma'am, the deputy repeated firmly. We went over this. They own the property. They're within their rights. Karen's jaw fell open. But, this is our land, the community's land. It's not, the deputy said. And if you don't leave these men alone, I'll cite you for harassment. The crowd gasped. Karen looked around wildly for support, but many of her followers were already silently backing away, some even returning to their cars. She pointed at me desperately. You can't do this, she whispered. You can't. I stepped forward. We're not trying to hurt you, I said quietly, but we're not leaving. We bought this land. We're building something good here. Her eyes trembled with rage and heartbreak. This was mine, she screamed. It wasn't, I said softly, but you could have bought it. That broke something in her. She let out a strangled cry and turned storming back to her SUV. She climbed in, slammed the door, and drove off so fast her tires spit mud in every direction. Her army scattered behind her, confused, embarrassed, disillusioned. Only the wind remained. Daniel exhaled. Well, that was something. Emilio nodded. Never seen a protest collapse in under 10 minutes. Jeff clapped his hands once. All right, back to building. We all laughed, tension lifting. By sunset, the cabin walls were half up. The roof outline was solid. The porch beams were in place. The ranch was truly beginning to take shape. Karen's crowd never returned. No more SUVs, no more signs, no more megaphones. Just the quiet of the valley and the sound of hammers shaping our future. We thought naively that Karen had finally reached her breaking point, that she had exhausted every trick, every false report, every meltdown, every desperate attempt. But Karen wasn't defeated. She was regrouping. And what she did next? Made everything before it looked like child's play. We woke on day 9, believing wrongly that Karen had finally burned out all her energy. After the community protest disaster, after the sheriff shutting her down in front of her own followers, after her crying, collapsing, threatening, bargaining, and screaming, we thought she had nothing left. We were wrong. Karen still had one final card to play, her most unhinged, reckless, unpredictable move yet, and she played it the moment our guard was down. The morning began peacefully. The contractors showed up early, ready to finish the exterior walls on the first cabin. Sam cooked eggs and bacon. Jeff fixed a loose hinge on the camper. I walked down to the creek to splash cold water on my face and soak in the kind of quiet you only get far from civilization. For the first time all week, I felt calm. That feeling lasted exactly 7 minutes. I heard Jeff shout my name from up the hill, voice tense, not scared, but alert. I jogged back, boots thumping on the damp grass. What's up? I called. He pointed to the ridgeline. Look. I followed his gaze, and my stomach tightened. Karen stood on the hill again, not marching, not yelling, just standing, still, watching. But something looked off about her, off balance, unsteady, Sam muttered. She looks like a horror movie teaser. And then we saw why. Karen wasn't alone. She wasn't standing by herself, she was standing beside a vehicle, a massive orange industrial vehicle, one we all recognized immediately. A bulldozer. My mind struggled to process it. A bulldozer, on her property, facing ours, pointed straight at our newly built cabin. I exhaled slowly. Oh no, the contractors froze. Tools hanging midair, heads whipping toward the hill. Jeff blinked twice. She can't? She wouldn't. Oh, she would, Sam said quietly. She absolutely would. We watched as Karen climbed into the bulldozer's seat. Not elegantly, not confidently, more like a stubborn toddler climbing onto a carnival ride she wasn't tall enough for. She grabbed the controls with trembling hands. Oh, hell no, I hissed, sprinting toward the hill. Jeff and Sam followed right behind me. Karen, I shouted. Karen, don't you dare, she revved the engine. The roar echoed across the valley like thunder. Birds scattered. Dust rose. The contractors dropped everything and ran toward us. Karen grinned, an unsettling, unhinged grin, and screamed over the engine, "If you won't stop building then, I will stop it for you." Then the bulldozer lurched forward. Karen pointed 40,000 pounds of steel and destruction directly at our cabin. Chaos erupted instantly. "Go, go, go," I yelled. Sam sprinted toward the cabin frame to warn the contractors to move. Jeff veered right, waving both arms at Karen like he could physically will her to stop. I ran straight up the hill, shouting her name over the roar. "Karen, stop, you can't do this." But she wasn't listening. She was beyond listening. Her face was twisted into something I didn't recognize. Rage, grief, determination, all balled together into a storm that no logic could reach. The bulldozer rumbled faster, bouncing across uneven ground, heading directly for the cabin. I watched the distance shrink 50 feet, 40-30, my legs burning as I climbed. The contractors abandoned their tools and ran. Sam pushed one of them out of the way as the bulldozer plowed through a stack of unused lumber scattering boards like matchsticks. "Karen," I screamed again, "stop the machine." For a moment, just a moment, I thought she might slow down. Her head turned, her eyes met mine wavering. Something human flickered behind them. Then her jaw clenched. She slammed the controls forward. 10 more feet. The bulldozer hit the edge of the cabin footprint, with a crunch pushing dirt and stones ahead of it like a wave. "No," I yelled, sprinting harder. "Stop." Then sirens. Not distant, close. A sheriff's cruiser skidded around the bend tires, throwing gravel. Another followed behind it. Lights flashing, dust clouding the air. Karen looked over her shoulder and panicked. She tried to brake. She hit the wrong lever. The bulldozer lurched violently sideways. It spun halfway, the blade gouging a massive trench in the ground, missing the cabin by maybe 6 feet. The machine tilted dangerously onto the slope, rocking like it might tip. Karen screamed, not in rage this time, but in raw fear. The engine sputtered. The dozer groaned. It settled crookedly into the dirt, angled, awkwardly stuck. The sheriff's deputies were out of their vehicles before the dust even settled. Karen Morris, one of them, shouted, "Turn off the engine right now." Karen fumbled with the controls, shaking so badly she nearly hit the throttle again. Now the deputy barked. She finally managed to shut it off. The valley fell silent except for Karen's ragged breathing. I reached the side of the bulldozer just as the deputies pulled her out. She stumbled to the ground, crying, gasping hair, wild eyes unfocused. You can't let them build," she sobbed. "They're ruining everything." The deputy took her by the arm. "Ma'am, you almost killed people. You damaged property you don't own, and you operated heavy machinery without permission on land that isn't yours." Karen shook her head frantically. "No, no, no, this land is mine. It's always been mine." "It isn't," the deputy said firmly. Karen looked around at all of us, at the cabin, the crew, the valley. Her face twisted with a mixture of denial and heartbreak. "This was my family's place," she whispered. "My memories, my kids, my husband." She started crying again. Real tears. Not weapon tears, not dramatic tears. Actual grief. The deputy spoke gently now. "Karen, I'm sorry, but that doesn't give you the right to destroy someone else's property." She collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her hands. The entire valley fell quiet. Even Jeff didn't joke. Even Sam didn't smirk. Even I felt something twist in my chest. But sympathy only goes so far. Because nearly killing people changes things. The deputy helped her up and guided her toward the cruiser. "I have to take you in for questioning," he said softly. "This could have been a felony." Karen didn't fight. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just nodded through tears. As they drove away, dust trailing behind them, the entire hill seemed to exhale. The tension that had been building for days broke and drifted away like morning fog. Jeff walked up beside me. "Well, that escalated to grand theft bulldozer real fast." Sam nodded slowly. "Do we keep building?" Daniel, the contractor, wiped sweat from his forehead. "Yeah," he said. "Let's get back to work." And just like that, hammers started again. Saws whirred. Wood thumped. The cabin rose. By sunset, the walls were fully up. The porch had railings. The roofline took shape. The ranch looked more real than ever. We sat on the porch steps, exhausted, dirty, and proud as the last rays of sunlight painted the hills orange. Jeff nudged me. Think she's done for real now, I stared out across the valley. She has to be, I said quietly. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew the truth. Karen wasn't finished. Not yet. She'd lost the battle. She hadn't lost the war. But tomorrow, there would be no tricks, no protests, no bulldozers. Just the end. For her, and the beginning for us. When the dust finally settled and the last nails were hammered into the cabin walls, I stood on that brand new porch and looked out across the land we had fought so hard for. The hills were quiet again. The creek shimmered. And for the first time since we arrived, the valley felt peaceful, truly peaceful. Karen's chaos had finally burned itself out, leaving nothing behind, but a reminder some people cling to the past so tightly they lose sight of what's right in front of them. But this land wasn't hers because she remembered it. It was ours because we cared enough to build something real on it. And that's the lesson I want you to take with you today. In life, people will try to push you off your own path out of fear, pride, or misguided ownership, but the only way to lose is to let them. Stand your ground, know your worth, and build the life you believe in, even when others scream that you shouldn't. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this wild journey, make sure to subscribe. There are many more HOA and Karen stories coming your way.